Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Shift Your Culture and Accelerate Performance, a how-to webinar brought to you by Human Synergistics. My name is Allison Johns, and I'm joined by my colleague, Tim Kupler, and we are guiding the discussion around culture and performance today. Our webinar will be 1 hour, and we encourage you to submit questions throughout the presentation. You can submit these using the question option in your GoToWebinar panel, as well as the chat feature. We will address these questions during the webinar, and if any questions are unanswered, we will personally follow up with you after today's presentation. I'd also like to let you know that all phones and microphones will be muted throughout this webinar. And lastly, we will be sharing the webinar slides, and a recording will be available after today's presentation. Now let's get started. So culture has become quite the hot topic. You actually hear the word culture now as people talk about their organizations. A lot of times it's in a more toxic space, but we've had some very positive experiences too with organizations such as Zappos and Southwest Airlines, just to name a few. When we think about in terms of culture feedback, Deloitte did a study around organizations that truly understand their culture, and it came out to be only 12%, while organizations that believe they have the right culture is only 19%. So luckily, this is an opportunity for all of us on this call to really dive in and understand cultures more.
Yeah, for whatever reason, there's this disconnect where this awareness is growing, a lot of times due to crises or problems, but it's not being translated to intentional action at the majority of organizations.
Right. Now, when we think about culture, we like to think about it in terms of challenge or what is the priority or problem you're looking to solve, and keeping a lens to that, and we'll discuss this more as we go through the presentation. But we wanted to start with a poll and get a feel from you all in terms of what are some of the greatest culture challenges that your organization or your clients' organizations may be experiencing. And these can be themes such as attracting and retaining employees, looking at engagement, diversity, customer experience. So let's go ahead and launch that poll. And we'll give you a little time to respond. Now this should be live, so go ahead and send through your responses now. I know recently customer experience has been a big opportunity for a lot of clients that we've been working with.
Yeah, it seems like the organizations that are a little more progressive, and we've got the basics on quality or some engagement, but they're really trying to move forward in the marketplace. Customer experience is big, but a lot of others that it's like their first foray into culture-related efforts. Well, they might be focused on quality, they might be safety, or maybe there's new products or technology that's launching that they're tying the work to. And how's our responses going? We've
got about 75% who have voted, so we'll give it just a couple more seconds for those last few. It's looking like engagement is one of the big ones, as well as teamwork. Innovation coming around third, so let's go ahead and close that. Looks like 87% voted, and here are the results.
Yeah, not a surprise that engagement's big, teamwork and collaboration. So we'll talk as we go through this webinar about, well, what's that engagement challenge holding back as far as the results of your organization? And is that holding back customer experience? Is that holding back, your ability to grow or innovate? So we're wanting to, if it's a general thing like engagement or teamwork, well, where's this connect with performance so that we can understand how our culture is helping us achieve those results and where it's holding us back, and it's always both.
Right. So when we think about culture in the present, a lot of organizations have an awareness of their culture, and they may talk about it a little bit, And it's coming more of a topic these days than it has in the past, where we wouldn't hear from organizations, oh, we want to look at our organizational culture. Or now it's becoming much more present and top of mind. But although we have that awareness, there's still not a common language or a true way to really measure what are some of those behaviors that are living out, some of those unwritten rules, or how to change culture and align it with some of our other initiatives around team building and leadership development. We're not really connecting it to our strategic plan. That's a separate initiative, and we're not bringing it all together to look at our strategic plan, our leadership development, all through the lens of our culture and what we're trying to achieve, especially around performance. So it can also be inconsistent in terms of some of the engagement factors like motivation and collaboration, and we can have some inconsistent performance based on what we know about our current culture. So as we've been moving forward and looking deeper into culture and how we can truly change it and keep an eye to performance, we've been collaborating with other culture experts out there. And 3 years ago, we started our annual Ultimate Culture Conference, and Edgar Schein has spoken at all three of those, as well as Larry Sen was at the first one. We have a constructiveculture.com blog and also our cultureuniversity.com, where we're collaborating with other present and popular folks out there that are in the culture space and getting new content out quite frequently. And this year, we're actually moving towards a regional approach in terms of our culture conference. And our first regional Ultimate Culture Conference will be in partnership with the University of Wisconsin-Madison and their Center for Professional and Executive Development, where we've got a day full of presentations around those in the area that are working on shifting their culture to more constructive cultures and aligning it with leadership work that they're doing. So we're really excited about that shift and more to come in the future.
Yeah, with the whole hope of, building more of a community around this work and about the connection to results and outcomes and what's really working, not working, and engaging the experts so that we're consistent with facts and fundamentals about what culture is by definition and what must be there to say it's evolved. And when we're clear about that, we can be much more intentional about change efforts.
So today we'll focus on 3 questions, looking at how does culture work, how do you shift culture and improve performance, and how can you get started, and looking at some resources and tools for you. So we really want to look at how we can bring clarity to culture and improve performance. And we'll start first with looking at how does culture actually work. So oftentimes climate and culture are overlapped, or people think that they're measuring culture, but they're actually looking more at climate. So climate is focused more on the perceptions and attitudes, how you feel within the organization. So looking at things like, do we have clarity of our mission? What are our rewards like? Are there benefits? It is aligned with our strategy and goals. What's engagement and satisfaction or motivation like within the organization? When we get to culture, we're actually looking at the norms and expectations. So what's expected or required of me to fit in? So am I expected to take on more challenging tasks and proactively share ideas with my team? Or am I expected to never make a mistake and don't rock the boat or push decisions upward? So once we come into an organization, we hear about all of the perks and benefits, but then when you actually get into your team, they're like, oh, no. Don't think about taking on that challenging task. You just do exactly what's expected of you. So more of those unwritten rules. So in terms of when we look at what is culture, culture is a system of shared values and beliefs that can lead to behavioral norms. And we're looking at those behavioral norms in the ways that they guide people to approach their work and the tasks at hand, as well as how they're expected to interact with others and solve problems. So the best way to think about it is in terms of the way we are expected to do things around here and fit into the organization.
Yeah, so much more than just how things work around here.
Exactly.
about those expectations, those perceptions, how that plays out and why.
Right. We also, there's that disconnect between what ideally should be expected and what's currently expected. So in most ideal cultures, what we see is that ideally members should be expected or implicitly required to help others grow and develop, involve others, pursue a standard of excellence, think ahead and plan, know the business. It's what we value and want for the organization and in order to truly achieve effectiveness and maximize our results. More often than not, we're not actually walking the talk, and currently members are expected to go along with others or take few chances, oppose things indirectly, follow orders even when they are wrong, or work long, hard hours. So what we value and believe should be expected has been translated into much more defensive behaviors as opposed to some of those constructive behaviors. So when we measure culture and climate, we have 3 different assessments that we utilize in order to capture our current, our ideal, and climate. So the OCI, or the Organizational Culture Inventory, looks at the behavioral norms and expectations that members like yourself are expected to fit in and meet expectations, as well as some of the outcomes associated with culture. The OCI ideal is the same survey and same items, so we can measure those gaps in terms of what is currently expected versus what is ideally expected. And now it's looking at what should be expected in organizations to maximize effectiveness, as well as some pieces around the readiness for change. So how is it supported by different levels within the organization, and how will it help us to actually achieve teamwork and collaboration? And the third survey is the Organizational Effectiveness Inventory, or OEI, and this is where we're getting much more in depth around the outcomes of the current culture, looking at themes like role clarity, motivation, as well as stress or job insecurity, looking at group outcomes such as teamwork and collaboration within units as well as with other units within the organization. And at the organizational level, looking at quality and how are we adapting and keeping up with the market and exceeding our customers' expectations. And the second piece of the OEI survey is looking at the causal factors. So the causal factors that are helping to reinforce the current culture, such as job design, communication, our HR systems, and how we can actually utilize these as levers for change to action upon and move to the ideal culture we're striving for. So I've started to allude to some of these constructive and defensive behaviors, but when we measure culture, we measure it on our circumplex model, which you see on the screen here, which is divided into 3 clusters of behaviors. The blue styles are the constructive, which have an emphasis around both people and task expectations, so looking at how we effectively set our goals, how we emphasize people's individual development and the growth and development of others, as well as collaboration. So much more of that balance of people and task and how the organization is expected to meet their higher order satisfaction needs. When we move into the passive defensive, or the green styles, now we're looking more at how we're expected to fit in and meet those expectations around how we interact with others while meeting our lower order security needs. So here we're expected just to go along with others, not really rock the boat, do things the way we've always done, and really lack any accountability or initiative. The more emphasis around those styles. And the third cluster is the aggressive defensive, or those red behaviors. And now this is the focus more around our task expectations and how we protect or promote our lower order security needs. So now we're expected to oppose things, be more critical, control others, focus more on internal competition rather than competition within the market, and get lost in the details, setting unrealistically high goals and working long, hard hours. So you can see with this profile here, this is typical of an ideal culture that members are striving for, with more emphasis around those constructive styles and less emphasis around the passive defensive and aggressive defensive styles.
And that's what's beautiful about this model, is it's not telling you what your culture should be. Members of the organization are defining their ideal, which is always going to be very blue. There might be some red or green extensions, but then we're comparing and say, well, you say you want this.
Right.
But then no matter what values are on the wall or what we say we want, here's the reality. And sometimes it matches up well. Other times there's some big gaps.
Absolutely. And that's shown more in detail with our How Culture Works model. So over here on the left-hand side of the screen, we have an ideal culture. It looks similar to the one we were just viewing, with an emphasis around those constructive styles. And typically it's aligned with our values and our strategy. If all of that is in place, then our current culture should match that ideal culture. With this, we have a disconnect, though, and we utilize those causal factors that are measured by the Organizational Effectiveness, or OEI, survey to see how people are involved or empowered, what's goal setting and rewards and punishment, how are those set up, and the job design and communication and leadership skills and qualities. How they're currently designed is helping to reinforce this much more defensive culture, which we see is a huge disconnect from where we want to be with our ideal culture, and is then leading over here on the right-hand side to more negative outcomes. So in this type of culture, there would be more role conflict and stress. People are getting inconsistent messages as opposed to being motivated and satisfied. Teams are not working well with each other. They're not collaborating with other units. We don't have an emphasis on quality. We're just kind of doing the things the way we've always done them, getting more inconsistent results and not adapting as quickly as we should to the market.
So the beauty of this model is it's the full MRI, and you have the two parts of culture, the ideal and current, and then you have the two aspects of climate, these causal factors and outcomes. And we're not saying, hey, a culture approach is better than climate. We're saying, hey, the power is in understanding both and how one reinforces the other. And we usually end up working with organizations that are either really performing well and wanting to take things further, or we're really struggling and we need to figure this out. And these tools help in that process.
And as Tim mentioned, it's really the full MRI. So you can see this is actually a sample How Culture Works model from a report. And we're actually looking at 31 causal factors. And within those causal factors, you get the item results. So you're getting a wealth of data and information that you can utilize to make those actions, as well as comparing them to the 12 outcomes that we're looking at. So you can see there's plenty of opportunity with this example, and you're able to dive into those details to make specific changes.
Well, and more importantly, to really guide how we should be engaging people. So not to just look at these results and, oh, here's the answers, but more we've got to take this back to those who responded, and we've got to do the qualitative work in parallel to really understand how this is playing out. What are the unique stories, examples, how it's impacting our results. So this is far more meaningful and beneficial and not driving judgments.
Absolutely, and we can't hold it at the top, but
right.
I love what you're saying about how we need to engage the whole organization, because everyone is living this culture.
Or your division or your location.
For sure.
It doesn't always have to be org-wide.
Yep. And here's just an example as well of how we can break down the data to look at subgroups within the organization. So one example here is looking at leadership versus non-leadership and seeing where we have subcultures within the organization. So you can see the leaders are experiencing a slightly more constructive culture with some more emphasis around the oppositional and competitive styles, where the non-leadership is experiencing a different kind of culture where we have more emphasis now on the passive defensive cultures and much less around those constructive. So how can we learn from these different subcultures? What are certain groups doing, and how can that be shared with other groups that may not be performing as well, and really helping to move everyone towards that same ideal culture they're striving for.
And the power is in understanding these differences and why is the experience different, right? Because the leaders say it's more comfortable to speak up and they feel more expected to operate in a constructive way. But these non-leaders, they're like, whoa, we're supposed to go along with things. We're not supposed to speak up and say what's on our mind.
Right. So now that we've taken a look at how culture works, let's look at how we can shift culture and start to improve performance.
And with this, it's incredibly important to have some common fundamentals that we're really going back to understand this. And these are two that just continue to persist as far as guiding this work. So first, culture is built through shared learning and mutual experience. That's how it's originally created, and that's the key to evolving it. But it's transmitted through climate factors and these behavioral norms. So even if you just started at an organization, you pick up on these norms, you pick up on these different systems or structures we're supposed to fit in with or follow, and we start playing along with the culture, so to speak. So what we want to do next is go to the next slide. There's a kind of a general flow chart. I'm not going to go through all of these details, but we want to talk about, well, how do cultures evolve and what by definition really must be there in order to say, hey, we've shifted our culture and a new norm has emerged. So go to the next slide. What's really important is to not try and tackle all of culture, right? Shine says culture can be like a bottomless pit. So we want to focus in on a priority outcome or problem or challenge. That's why we had the poll at the beginning. We talked about customer experience or growth or quality. And then through the qualitative and quantitative, we want to understand, well, what's the shift needed to improve results with the outcome we're targeting? And we want to be really specific. What are some of those defensive things we want to go from being very avoidant or just going along with things to proactively sharing our ideas and translating them to action, but whatever your unique language is. Next slide. So when we know the outcome and the shift we really want to intentionally enable, we want to understand the climate. We've got to understand, well, how have we built an organization that's really reinforcing some of these red and green things versus the constructive we need, and what are some of the reward systems or goal setting or other areas for, again, the outcome we're trying to improve that are holding us back. And we want to then engage a team in looking at these results and the qualitative feedback and adjusting our customer experience plan, adjusting our quality plans or whatever it might be to engage people differently, to overcome these challenges, to break down some of these rocks or problems in the work climate. So it's all about then being able to make this connection between the behavior we're targeting, the results we need, and the plan we're going to manage together to get there. So it doesn't go from, one day everyone's showing these red and green to the next day they're all showing the blue, right?
It doesn't work that way?
No, unfortunately. But there's always some, first movers and some people that, well, yeah, let's try this new approach to engaging people. Let's get more proactive in how we listen and include people, and we'll see the results. And if and only if people say, well, that worked better, and we got something out of that, will others start to behave in that way? Because not because we told them, but because they are starting to understand how we do that in our organization, how it plays out in meetings. So this cycle here starts and hopefully spreads, and over a long period of time, a new norm emerges on the next slide. But the key is the results have to be there long before. So that's why we're zeroing in on something like customer experience, quality, whatever it might be, a technology implementation, because we have to see the results anyway. And if people agree that that new behavior helped us get there, that's what we need. So you can take a look at that flow chart in the slides we'll share. But if we know that that's what needs to be there. This intentionality around connecting it to performance, the behaviors we want to shift, and the climate and systems and structures that have to be part of that journey. What we've done is create this kind of real general 4-phase constructive culture development framework that we've been using across numerous projects the last 3 years, where phase 1 is getting clear about that purpose. What is that outcome we're targeting, or multiple outcomes we're targeting, and doing the qualitative and the quantitative. Phase 2 is feeding that into leadership or a change team to define the process to engage the rest of the organization in changing that strategy or plan. Phase 3 is actually following through on that engagement approach. And phase 4 is managing the implementation and connecting it to the development of individuals and teams. So we're building the skills and capabilities to make these shifts sustainable. So we're going to dive into each of these phases, just the surface. So on phase 1, the purpose, let's go to the next slide. So these are just some examples of a number of recent projects, whether it be designing for quality in an architectural firm that designed the stadium that the Super Bowl was in this year, or a large retail, big box retailer that was integrating an acquisition and had a whole new store model to implement, or in education, improving learning outcomes for students. And they had a technology implementation that was supposed to free up time for teachers and others to spend more time with the students. There's always a very strategic connection here, and that's the difference between culture and engagement. Is, you know, engagement can be kind of a general approach, but culture needs to be very strategic, because if we don't see the results, the behavior will not spread, and it's going to be a problem. So next slide. A lot of times we've talked mostly about the survey side of things, but we're working with our partners on the qualitative side. So for instance, when it comes to interviews, this are some questions we'll use to really zero in on, well, what is the outcome we're targeting? What are some related outcomes or issues that are out there where the primary might be customer experience, but hey, we've got some turnover issues or other things, and that's negatively impacting customer experience. So we've got to go at a couple things. And we want to understand the perception of the current state, what's troubling leaders, what's frustrating, because often it's these cultural and climate things playing out. So this is just a small taste of getting into the qualitative side, but we did want to emphasize that a little bit in the process. So these are just 6 big areas that are covered in that phase 1. What's the purpose with clarity? Who's the core team enabling and facilitating this work? Might be a cross-functional team. It's often someone other than the leadership team. We're starting with the qualitative analysis, interviews, focus groups, really understanding how things play out. Then we do the quantitative, and new things will emerge, because culture's like the water we swim in, the air we breathe. We're going to surface new things. So we take that back to the teams and groups and do more qualitative. But again, it's all connected to that outcome of improving customer experience or growth. So it's very tangible. It's not creating a separate culture plan. And then we want to share the results of that assessment work across the organization with leadership and really capture what are our key learnings. We're really starting to understand what makes us tick, our strengths, but also those core challenges that we just keep running into over and over again. So this is just the big picture of that phase 1 work.
So after we've clarified the purpose and gone through the quantitative and qualitative work that Tim was mentioning, we move into phase 2. Now we're really focusing more on getting alignment with the core team further, but spending more time with the leadership team to focus around those improvement plans that can then be shared back with the broader population. So before we get into some of the best practices, want to give at a high level some of the timeline or the planning. So in phases 1 and 2, as we're aligning the core team and completing the surveys, if we look at this over a 12-week example, we're looking at getting that core team on the project, whether that's a combination of leaders and other key influencers within the organization, getting those people on board and comfortable with the plan, and then beginning some of those leadership interviews. So sitting down with senior leaders and getting their thoughts around the culture and potential improvements, but getting more feedback around some of those behaviors expected within the organization. And then focusing on sharing more internal communication of getting the word out there about the data that's being collected and how this will be used and what's the purpose of the project. Doing some focus groups across the organization at various levels, and then actually implementing the OCI and the OEI surveys in those last couple of weeks.
So a key point is not doing necessarily all this qualitative after the survey, but really being curious, diving in, understanding the situation and how we're talking about it now, and then building on it with the survey.
And then we need to spend some significant time reviewing those results and capturing the themes across the qualitative data that we're finding, and looking at the results from the surveys and other quantitative measures prior to sharing those results back with the senior team, and then actually getting to phase 2 in those last few weeks and taking that planning to the next level with them. From there then, after we've completed phases 1 and 2, that's where we're focusing more on aligning the broader team or the broader population that was surveyed, getting their feedback and making any modifications to the plan so that we can begin to implement those improvement plans and get some momentum. But during this time, having monthly leadership and culture project team meetings to be tracking the work that's in progress and seeing how things are moving in that right direction, as well as communications to review the progress with the broader population as well.
And the key here is, remember, it all goes back to culture built through shared learning and mutual experience. So depending on the outcome, let's say it's customer experience or whatever, and well, I'm in finance, I'm not so tied into this, but we have to engage them. We have to make them part of the journey, or the shared learning won't spread to that area at all. We won't be learning from what we're doing, how we're doing it. And I get finance involved in our benchmarking analysis or other groups just to be a part of the journey, and they want to be included. And that's the only way we can really unite people behind the performance priority, is that they start seeing where their function contributes to the bigger goal.
Absolutely. And then, of course, at the end of those 12 months, to re-engage the larger groups to get their feedback around the work that has been done, and what shifts or tweaks do we need to make in order to prioritize and keep the momentum going that we already have underway.
And that's what's normally missed. So people will do surveys, we'll do action planning, we'll roll it out, but we don't at that point say, we're going to re-engage you in the same way in 6 months. You're going to tell us, hey, what's really starting to take hold, what's helping, what hasn't lived up to expectation. So it's like,
not just a top-down initiative. Everyone has to buy in.
It's like 1 out of 100 organizations I see are real consistent about that follow-up session and the next one after that.
Yeah, you don't want it to feel like it's being pushed on you. Well, that culture, it's just from leadership. So really getting that buy-in. But another key piece of it is the focus around leadership development as well. So here's where we can start to do some surveys as we begin phase 3 as well, with leadership focus of senior leaders, and then taking it further down within the organization, so that as we focus on shifting our culture, we're also working on shifting our individual behaviors and the impact that we're having on the culture. So as we showed before with phase 1, now here are some of the best practices around phase 2 for that facilitation of the leadership team improvement planning. So first, really wanting to align the core team and the leadership team around the planning efforts, getting them on board with the process, making them aware of some preliminary results and getting their buy-in before actually developing the plan to engage all members. So we want to get clear around what are the priorities based on what we learned from all of the data, both the quantitative and the qualitative. What are our priorities? If we think all the way back to that initial purpose for the project, where do those priorities lie? And then starting to get into some of those cultural change targets. So Tim spoke earlier about going from the from to. So moving from some of those defensive behaviors to the constructive behaviors and putting it into your language of what do these look like currently and what they should look like within the organization, as well as other key measures, not just the survey data, but other key measures that we have, business measures, so that we can really tie it to performance to track some of those shifts that as we implement our plans, where do we expect to see some positive movement, as well as thinking about how we may need to adjust the strategies and plans once we get the feedback from the broader organization.
And that's the key here, is that it's adjusting strategies and plans, not creating a culture plan. This should accelerate and enable current strategies and plans that are running into the culture obstacles, that we don't have the systems and structures we need to support them.
Right. So we have a few tools that enable you to be able to track and utilize during the planning process. This is our culture roadmap and plays into a lot of the things that Tim was mentioning as we were looking at shifting some of those behaviors. So we have our current performance, looking at those top priorities and tying them back to our strengths and our areas of improvement, values, what are other key measures we need to track, what are our systems for our priorities and goals, communication habits, and how can we really build motivation, looking at some of the rewards and punishments. So utilizing this to see, are we meeting any of these initially to start? More often than not, most organizations are not even meeting, 70% of them? Or?
Yeah, so there's only 3% of the organizations that we've interacted with. About 3,000 people have walked through this roadmap, and 3% say for our number one priority, we're covering these areas. So this is very different than like survey and action plan where, we've got to improve goal setting, or, we got to improve rewards for everything we do. No, this is saying box one is customer experience or quality or safety. Now let's learn as an organization how we integrate these things to improve results.
Mm-hmm. We also created a second version of the roadmap that aligns to the OCI and the OEI survey so that you can actually start to see the connects between where this comes out in your actual survey results. And the other is, within this past year, we released a Quick Start program, our 90-day Quick Start program, to accomplish phases 1 and 2 that we've discussed as you implement your culture and look at it, going through all the things we've covered around aligning to the purpose, education, capturing that qualitative and quantitative data, and working with the leadership team around improvement planning and how to engage the organization. And we can connect you with a culture expert to take you through that process if an organization is interested.
Yeah, and this has been refined over a number of years because
Absolutely.
Most consulting firms or groups that have an emphasis on culture, they maybe deal with 5 projects, 10 projects a year, and we're dealing with hundreds over a period of many years and trying to really get a best practice frameworks and ways so that even if it's your first time dealing with this as an organization, you can dramatically increase your likelihood of success because, we're following a proven framework and measurements and things like that.
And you can achieve quite a bit in 90 days. So it's not that we're saying you're going to change your culture in 90 days. We are getting to a place where you have a plan and how to engage with the organization in order to implement those plans.
Because we can't hope of having that ultimate change if we start off totally on the wrong foot and really struggle. Well, talking about the bigger plan is kind of a waste if those first 90 days, aren't on track.
Right.
So the key with that phase 2 and that road mapping is that leadership is not making the decision about these are all the changes we're going to make with our customer experience plan or quality plan or whatever it might be. They're defining the approach to engage the organization in that process. And if you've got a core team that's driving this work, they're often defining and drafting that structure. We're working with a big retail client. We've got an awesome core team. You know, they've already laid out how we're going to get the rest of the organization involved. How are we going to spread best practices more effectively? So the key is phase 2 ends with that engagement plan and approach, and then through that engagement process are the improvement plans finalized together, again, to drive that shared learning of us building it up together, not rolling it out on people. So we'll do things like on this slide, where we're sharing the purpose, the assessment results, the improvement vision, what we learned. We're engaging the broader team in some targeted areas based on what we learned from the assessment result. It might be on refining that from-to shift. It might be on some of the customer experience systems or processes that are, you know, we found were a struggle. It could be on our communication systems or other areas. And we're getting clear about our culture change targets, that shift. We're getting prioritized feedback from the organization, so not just a bunch of ideas, but let's define that as a team. And then when are we going to re-engage again so that we can drive this learning, and how are we going to manage, communicate, and recognize as we go so that we're sharing those stories and what's working and where we're going next. We'll do this, a lot of these activities, we call this building culture muscle, where we're brainstorming and prioritizing in groups. So, hey, you might not have picked my idea, but at least I was part of a process. I see how it's all coming together as a team. And then the last phase is how we're connecting it to the development of leaders and team members. This is a critical part of it. We'll just jump right to the bottom line with this, where we're managing, communicating, and recognizing as we implement those, for example, revised customer experience plans, that we're connecting this with our leadership development. If this is the from-to shift in our culture, by definition, that's a shift we need in our leadership and how we're impacting others and approaching this work. We want to share stories and examples of how that constructive behavior is leading to results, so that spreads across teams. And then we want to re-engage these groups with the focus on what's working and why, and what's not living up to expectations. So it's all a learning and results connection that we're driving at every step. A big part of this work is looking at not just the engagement approach, which is the culture side of the coin, but also the leadership. And often the very first step is helping the senior leadership team understand that they are reinforcing that current culture, how they're behaving is reinforcing that current culture, and how can they role model those constructive expectations and behaviors that we're really targeting, so people can see us walking the talk in some specific areas at the top, and that's a guide for other levels as we get them engaged in this work.
Mm-hmm. And really showing them more to how their intent is being translated into an impact. It's so powerful.
Yeah, so often this becomes, well, they have to change out in the organization.
Right.
Until leadership understands.
Not our problem.
They are reinforcing that current state in many ways they don't realize.
Right.
And again, we showed in the circumplexes how top leaders, they might, hey, things are pretty constructive where I'm at. But they don't have to change their behavior to fit in every day so much as maybe the front lines do.
Absolutely.
So not a real complex framework, but obviously it can be customized to what the business challenge is or the outcome, how we need to engage people. And at the end of the day, you know, we want to work through these 4 phases in an intentional way. Next slide. With the vision being, hey, we're not doing this one time. It's not, oh, we do a survey every 3 years or whatever it might be. This is strategic. We're connecting it to customer experience. What do we learn from that? Oh, wow, we really need to build it into our innovation approaches and new products or services. So it keeps building. This next slide is an example of a top performing organization we've been interacting with for over 20 years. The next slide is one that's really focused on that Quick Start program and showing progress in that very first year and what's possible as far as going from a highly aggressive passive to actually really showing some constructive results, and they saw the business results at the same time from a customer experience standpoint. So at the end of the day, the reason that type of shift in the starting point of culture change and the results that accompany it is because we're going from this awareness and lack of these other things to at least on our customer experience strategy, our quality strategy, our safety strategy, whatever it might be, we're building that common language in that area, that measurement, that strategic approach, how we're engaging people, and in every case, you get better performance overall. The only question is the decisions we're making, are we moving fast enough compared to our competitors and what's going on in the marketplace? But the feedback on the engagement is always better, and it's always more strategic and intentional than what we were doing before. That was really focused on more of this driving shared learning, focusing on an outcome, which is this top row. But in larger projects, especially across, organizations that might be a few hundred people up to thousands, understanding and spreading specific subculture strengths is important. So that one retail client, they have thousands of locations, and they need a means to understand, well, what are our constructive teams and groups, and how can we decode how they're doing it in our culture? Because if they can do it, maybe our other stores can do it. Same with bank branches and other examples we've got going. Always this feeds into leadership development, and then we will see some systems or structures, onboarding or whatever it might be, that while through the assessment process, we've got a big opportunity here to fix something that'll help us across all outcomes.
So we've answered the first two questions around how culture works and how can you shift culture and improve performance. So now we have another poll for you to ask you about how would you like to get started. So are you interested in having a call with one of our culture experts or possibly seeing a demo of some of the surveys, the OCI and OEI that we've talked about with one of our team members? Or possibly information on one of our accreditation workshops to get accredited in the tools and be able to use within your organization or with your clients. Or if you're interested in more information on the surveys and the Quick Start program we highlighted. So let me go ahead and launch this poll now, and you can feel free to select multiple items. We'll capture that information and follow up with all of you based on what you're interested in.
While we're filling this out, if there's any questions or feedback that you might be interested in. There's one question that came in about connecting culture and performance, and how do you measure that?
Yeah.
And again, that goes back to, well, what's the outcome we're trying to improve? If it was customer experience, one client, they have a customer experience measurement that they had been tracking for many years and use that as really the business measure to connect it to. But what we can do is take the culture and climate results across, let's say, your different departments or locations, and put that alongside that customer experience measure and turnover and other business measures, and basically map for you how your subcultures are driving results. So right from the very start, there's a lot of value in doing the analysis, but that's only to really drive a broader effort to improve those measures organization-wide over the short to medium term. So that's a good question, and we get it often.
Thanks for answering that, Tim. If there's any other questions feel free to send those through. I'll go ahead. Oh, we got another one. Just received OCI and OEI results for a client. Would like to know more about Quick Start before my first launch meeting with the client executive team. Jeff, we will definitely follow up with you directly. Great to have you on the line. Haven't talked to you in a while, Jeff, so we'll definitely follow up and get you started on that process.
But anyone can go to our website,
yes,
and under solutions, there's some different options there where you'll see the Quick Start program and be able to go to that page. We'll get you the info directly if you've attended this webinar, but it gives a breakdown of the different areas of the Quick Start program. And if you've done the survey, the key is, well, have we done any qualitative? And getting some of that matching up, because if we've done data alone, then people will often resort to judgments.
Right.
And, oh, well, here's why we're not constructive. When we want to engage people and say, well, that may be true, but here's what we heard from these groups or teams to bring it all together. So that would be one of the top things as far as if you're already moving forward, how to circle back and get the Quick Start going is let's make sure we're matching up the qualitative.
Absolutely. Any other questions before we move on? Give another moment here. Okay.
One more question.
Would like to talk to a culture rep expert about the qualitative methodology.
Sure. So just since that was the question, we'll answer it for everybody. We've been really refining this and working with our consulting partners to apply it over and over again. So in the context of the outcome we're trying to improve, customer experience, we engage groups and we say, well, what are the areas of behavior we can count on that's actually helping us from a customer experience standpoint, that's deeply embedded in how we operate, and we prioritize some of those strengths in the language that people use. And then we say, well, where there's some gaps and some inconsistencies about how we behave across team members and even with our customers that's holding us back. And we prioritize some of those gaps. And then the key is to go deeper. So we might say, well, we've got this gap where we don't feel empowered to solve problems, we can't make decisions on the front line. And we say, well, what are the beliefs that are driving that gap? Well, I'm not empowered, it's not my job, it's not my responsibility, I'll get in trouble. So if we don't get down to the belief level that's really driving that pattern of behavior on the surface, then how do we know if what we're implementing will fix it? We might say, oh, well, we just have to train them better. But if we haven't understood why we're behaving in that way and what their perceptions are, then it'll hold us back. And then the last step is, once we understand the behavior, the beliefs, we want to understand, well, what from the work climate is reinforcing that current state? What systems or structures? Well, we don't do enough training for the front lines, or supervisors don't have the skills to coach and follow up or the time to do it. So these are all parts of the work climate that's reinforcing that state. So this whole structure, what's the gap, the beliefs, how's the climate reinforcing us is the basic structure we've been using.
Great. All right, well, we're about at time. If no other questions are coming through, we've got our contact information up here. So if anything else comes to mind, don't hesitate to reach out to Tim or I. And we also encourage you to check out our website for these offerings like the Quick Start methodology to get an overview of that. And we'll soon be releasing a leadership team solution similar to the Quick Start coming out soon. And of course, follow our constructiveculture.com blog that shares a lot of these stories and methodologies for you to keep in mind. We did have one more question that came in. Using the tool set for due diligence on mergers and acquisitions as well, would like to know if you have any clients that are using similarly and any case studies.
Yeah, I mean, most often it's coming through as far as after the acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
What we definitely recommend is if someone's actively in M&A mode and evaluating opportunities, that they get the process started on their own organization.
Yes.
and understand their culture and climate, and through that process alone, they'll be able to identify strategically, hey, where is there some gaps? What do we want to be looking for in our partners? If we lack the language and measurement and knowledge on our own organization, it's just put on steroids when we're trying to go through an acquisition.
For sure. Great.
All right, well, thanks everybody, and we'll send a follow-up email with some different resources and links that you'll find useful, hopefully.
And of course, if you are available on September 17th, be sure to join us for the first regional Ultimate Culture Conference in Madison.
Yep, just a few seats left, and we're looking for a sellout, and you'll love it.
Hope to see you there, and thank you again for your participation and for attending today's webinar. We'll be sending that follow-up later today, and thank you, and have a great day.
Yep, thank you, everybody.